seen the wind, but I felt the breeze today. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know where it went, but this guy can't deny it's in the sky.
With that said, would you welcome the one and only Don Stewart?
Yeah, one and only. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Good to see you. That's gonna be great next week. What Barry's doing, isn't it? I wish I could be here, but it is. Well, it's not really vacation time for me, as it were. Can we hear okay, by the way? Okay, good. Maybe it's my ears. This is last week. It wasn't working real well. Was I think. It's my spring break already for my daughter. So she's coming out from college, and so from Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and it's going to be. Was like 71 degrees there today. Tomorrow night it'll be down to 12. That shows you the fluctuation there. So I told her the weather out here, so she's very jazzed to come out to Southern California. Anyway, this could be a great night. This could be a lot of fun, what we're going to do tonight. It's, the timing of God is always amazing, and it's always perfect. It's never off, never wrong, this and that. But really this Revelation chapter 12 we've been doing, interesting, we come to it at this particular time. When this particular time in our world, so many things are happening that are of monumental interest and importance, and we're going to be talking about those tonight. But again, what I want to do is start out by reminding you that Revelation chapter 12, come to the conclusion, it is one of the most important chapters in the entire Bible. It is the interpretive key of the book of Revelation. Remember, we started by making 6 observations about this chapter. It is the interpretive key of the entire book of Revelation. You get this right, you're going to get it all right. You get this wrong, God help you. And so it's going to serve as the interpretive key to understand God's plan of the ages. Then we talked about the necessity of properly interpreting and understanding these 7 personages in chapter 12 and chapter 13, have a correct identification of the personages and the signs. And then if we do this properly, we'll discover the forces behind this conflict, a conflict that's been going on, actually, in one sense, before we even came about as human beings on the face of the earth, before the earth was created. This conflict, though, that has come to our planet. And this chapter, what we saw last week, is what really explains the conflict, the outworking of it. And so the future struggle, still to be seen here on this planet, is an outworking of a past conflict. Like we said, it's been going on from day one with the fall of Satan and just everything that's been happening since then. And so, as we mentioned, we're introduced in these 2 chapters to 7 prominent personages in chapters 12 and 13 who will dominate this last 3.5-year period on the earth called the Great Tribulation. And of course, they include the woman, which we identified as Israel, the male child, which is, of course, the Lord Jesus, the dragon, who is the devil, Satan, Michael the archangel, of course, who is Michael the archangel, who is the one of the 2 angels named in Scripture, the one who is the keeper, watcher over Israel, as it were. This evening, we'll talk a little bit about the remnant, which we'll run into. And then in ensuing weeks, the first beast and the second beast in Revelation 13. So all of this has to do with bringing us through the Great Tribulation, the 7th trumpet, and all that's going on. What we're going to do here real briefly, if you have your Bibles, to turn to Revelation chapter 12, and we're going to look at, pick up where we picked up last week. There we go. If I'm not mistaken, we end with the verse, was it verse 10 we finished with? Or of 11, right? 11, yeah, I thought so, verse 11. And so this is, again, the song that's going on in heaven, a great voice, actually back to verse 10 in heaven saying, now it's the happening, become the salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah, his Christ. And because, why? He has been cast down, the accuser of our brethren, the one who accuses them in the presence of God, our God, night and day and night. And they have overcome him through the blood of the Lamb and through the word of their testimony. And then that wonderful verse, they did not love their own lives until the place of death. Now, we pick up, for this reason you rejoice, heavens, and the ones dwelling upon the earth. But woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has been cast down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has a little time. And then John goes on to say, when he saw the dragon, that he was cast down upon the earth, he pursued the woman, which gave birth to the male child. And it was given to the woman 2 wings as of an eagle, of a great eagle. And she flew into the desert, into a place where she was nourished there for a time and times and a half a time, or 3.5 years, from the face of the serpent. And then it says the serpent cast out from his mouth behind the woman water as of a flood, in order that he might make her drowned, as it were. And the woman and the earth cried out to the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and devoured the water which was cast out from the dragon from his mouth. Now the dragon's not happy. In verse 17, the dragon was angry, wrathful at the woman, and went away out to make war with the rest of her seed, even the ones keeping the commandments of God and having the testimony of Jesus. All right, we read that. We're going to just real briefly look at this tonight, because it's going to be, like I said, a very special night. But what it tells us here, as we finish the 12th chapter, is that this personage who has been in the heavenlies his entire career, created as a great angel, created as one who is in the presence of the Lord, fell from that position, has access during this age, finally is cast out of heaven. We saw that last week, the war in heaven. Michael and his angels defeated this other personage and his angels, and he's cast out of heaven. And then it says he realizes he has a short time. So we're dealing with the last 3.5 years of this great tribulation period. And we had last week, of course, sort of in a summary, in a nutshell, the life and ministry of the Lord Jesus. Just a few things about it. We saw he was caught up into heaven. The ascension was what was emphasized afterwards, that the dragon wanted to kill him, wanted to kill the woman, which is, of course, Israel, that was giving birth to the man-child, and then was not able to. And he finally, escaped, ascended to heaven. So the dragon then went after, of course, the woman, because if the dragon can destroy Israel, then he's destroyed the promises of God, because God said Israel would last and be around here forever. And so then we have the woman, fleeing into the desert. We talked about that. And this dragon then, that had been cast down, is persecuting her, pursuing her in verse 13. And the woman was given 2 wings, the eagle's wings, to fly away, and flew into the desert to a place where, she was being nourished there for 3.5 years, being taken care of. Now, we talked about this last week. Some people feel it's the place Petra there in the country of Jordan. Maybe, it may not be. We just don't know. It doesn't really matter. Remember, God took care of Elijah at the brook there, fed him. God is going to supernaturally somehow protect his people during that time. Now, the rest of the people that it's referring to here, and this is going to be one of the highlights of the rest of the book of Revelation, is this remnant. The remnant is from the nation Israel, the believers there, because they're going to come a time, at this particular time in history, as we're going to see, that they're going to have their eyes open. They're going to realize, look upon him who they have pierced. And there's going to be a great revival that takes place during this time where there's the greatest tribulation that's going to happen to their nation. Now, and then the devil goes off after he can't, destroy the remnant there, and tries to pursue the other people on the planet who believe in Jesus. Now remember this, with our timeline, God has told us when he comes back, we'll get eventually to Revelation 19, the second coming of Christ. When he comes back, Matthew 25 tells us at that time he's going to set up his kingdom. But there are going to be people to divide, the goats and the sheep. The sheep will go into the kingdom, the goats will go to judgment. Now remember, we talked about last week how difficult it's going to be for those living on this planet who are believers, because until that time, Satan's been working in the heavenlies and his angels, but now they're all here on the earth trying to wipe out the people. If Satan can wipe out every single person who has believed in Jesus, then there wouldn't be anyone to populate the millennium, then God's promises wouldn't be true. Now you think about it, from day one, he's tried to kill, the nation Israel. In fact, we just have Purim. Feast of Purim just started last night, today, with the story of Esther. If you heard Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, he made a point the other day that they're, celebrating Purim, which basically is the salvation of the Jewish people through Esther, as Mordecai, her uncle, told her, "You are here for such a time as this." And so what we see in Scripture is God protecting the people during the time of Esther, during the time of the Exodus, before that when Pharaoh wanted to kill all the male childs, We've seen it happen historically, and then, of course, they tried to kill the Lord Jesus 6 different occasions. The Gospels tell us, even right after his birth, before he was born, etc., etc. So the point is simply this, that God has protected his word and his people from day one. But right now what we're seeing in Revelation chapter 12, that there's this knowing he has a short time, this being is going to go out of his way to kill anybody that confesses the Lord Jesus. The good news is, it seems that the Lord's going to supernaturally protect them, because without supernatural protection, they wouldn't exist. All right, now, let's kind of put it all in present day. We are living at a very, 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 shall we say, important time in the history of the human race. And in the history of the United States of America. And probably, again, I'm not one that's prone to exaggeration. I don't like to exaggerate. But I got to tell you, this could be, it seems to be, one of the most important times in the history of our country, because some of the things that are going to happen, that will happen, are happening, may determine in a big way, even the survival of this country, what their future is going to hold. And because of that, and how it fits so perfectly into the battle that's going on here in Revelation chapter 12, all that's the eternal battle that's now put right in front of us, and now we know who the players are. With the events that have happened just the last couple of days, this is Wednesday, Monday, yesterday, and today, what I'm going to do, Barry's going to come up, and he and I, for the rest of the time, are going to talk specifically about what's happened the last 3 days here in our country, and how it fits so much into this battle talked about in Revelation chapter 12, and this battle for the ages, and how it is setting the stage for what's going to happen in the future and all of this. So Barry, why don't you come up here, and we will have a discussion on these events that have happened, because I'm trying to think of the right adjectives to use, and sometimes the word profound is just doesn't quite make it. Because we've seen things happen in the last few days. Like our friend Joe Rosenberg said the other day, if he's writing one of his novels and wrote about this, no one would believe it. They said, this can't be, this is ridiculous. No one would believe what happened, but we know that truth sometimes is stranger than fiction, isn't it? And so we've seen things happen the last few days that have sort of set the stage, we think, for what, well, we don't know, Barry, do we? How soon in the future, but it's quite awesome, isn't it?
It is. It's been quite a couple of days, so to speak, and things continue to develop even today.
Even as we speak.
Yeah.
Well, let's summarize the highlights or the lowlights, shall we say?
Well, I think just starting off and kind of picking at particular issues, there's been a lot of questions surrounding the man who holds the most powerful office on the planet, and he happens to be the president of these United States, as to where his loyalties lie. And we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Giuliani questioning whether the guy even loves the country or not. And I think that's a valid question. And looking at some of the things that have developed since the speech was given, and we'll talk about some of those things too, but a lot of things are surfacing, and we're seeing the polarizing of the earth around the city of Jerusalem. I mean, that's really the heart of the matter, and that's a fulfillment of prophecy in and of itself. But one of the things I think that is kind of surfacing is the haze is starting to clear, at least for many, and people are either behind him or they're realizing who he is, and that's why we see a lot of strong language beginning to surface about him, even from Arab countries. One of the Arab newspapers today, a doctor who had written an article in the paper, Al Jazeera in Saudi Arabia, said that Obama is one of the worst presidents that this country has ever had. And that was because of some of the things that happened over the past 48 hours. Now, if we look at recent history and move back even a little bit further into the issues dealing with Egypt, and some of his tactics that have surfaced and now been made public that have taken place since the overthrow or the coup or whatever you want to call it there in Egypt, when the Muslim Brotherhood took over, then there was an offer to send some of our F-15 fighters to Egypt. Now, as soon as a pro-American anti-radicalism leader took hold over there, El-Sisi, those F-15s and the offer to send them to Egypt were withdrawn by our president. So the big question is, what's his deal with Iran? What is it that he is so fascinated with? And I think a lot of that works into his ideology in that I don't think he disagrees completely that America is the great Satan. I think he sees capitalism as an enemy and communism as the method of governance that ought to be in place. And this would fit right in with the guy who's going to come upon the world scene and operate within that type of system and monitor commerce throughout the world. The monetary system to a degree, can't buy or sell unless you take his mark and all those other things. But now we see just this with our own country. And I think that probably puts in front of us one of those questions that's often asked, and that is, where's the United States in Bible prophecy? And I know there's a lot of folks that like to lean toward the young lions in Ezekiel 38, but I don't necessarily see it that way. I think the United States falls in right where the rest of the world falls into, and that it has no real authority in the last days.
Yeah, who would have thunk it if someone would have been told the prime minister of our greatest ally in the Middle East comes to the United States of America to address both houses of Congress at a watershed time in their own history, with events transpiring in the world that could, could determine their own survival. And the President of the United States doesn't show up, the Vice President doesn't show up, the Secretary of State doesn't show up, none of the members of the Cabinet show up, many of the top leaders don't show up, and after his speech, we have a Democratic response to it. This is not a Democrat versus Republican thing, but I mean, can you imagine that? But this is what's happened. It's been so strange and so weird the last few days we've seen something like that. The president says, no, I didn't listen to the speech. I sort of read the outline. Nancy Pelosi said it insulted her intelligence sitting in there. Yes, I know. And she was offended by it. We'll leave it at that. We don't have to comment. You guys can fill in the blank there.
Oh, I'll comment.
Yeah. And then we have the New York Times saying it was just political stagecraft, and all it was the speech. And Obama said there was nothing new that he suggested. When actually there was 3 new points that he did suggested. Obviously, he didn't read the outline very well of the speech. And so here's the thing. I remember before it was given, we prayed. We were told, we had Joel on Monday and Tuesday on the program, and Joe Rosenberg was there at the AIPAC speech the Prime Minister gave on Monday. Then of course he was there Tuesday with the speech. That was yesterday, wasn't it? It seems like light years ago, wasn't it? You just gave it yesterday? Yeah, anyway, there at the speech, and he shared with us, and we prayed, and we have been praying for our country. But I told Barry and a few others, I said, I hope I'm wrong on this, but I don't think there's a chance, any chance whatsoever, our administration is going to listen to what's being said. They're not going to pay any attention to there. In fact, even before he got on to speak, Susan Rice, you remember the one who lied about the Benghazi thing, got on TV and said, 5 networks and said, it was the movie that caused that. She got up at the AIPAC thing and said Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech is going to be a disaster. Obama eventually said, no, just a distraction. And then so basically before he even got on, they had dissed it. And I'm thinking, God help the United States of America. God help us. Because Genesis 12:3 is still in the Bible. God will bless those that bless and curse those that curse. Anyway, Barry, that's why, again, we don't like to, be histrionic here or get kind of too excited about things. But, this is one of these events. Because as Prime Minister Netanyahu, I hope all of you saw the speech. If not, you can watch it. It's archived on C-SPAN, on Fox News. You need to watch it. Because he laid out a very clear and convincing and a true case that here we have a country, basically Iran, attempting to obliterate and wipe out another country. And they're not even shy about it. That is the nation Israel. But also they're wanting to obliterate us too in the enrichment of uranium. And I'll shut up in a second, but one other thing that Prime Minister Netanyahu was saying, it's even if Iran abides by the deal, it's still a bad deal in the long run, because in 10 years, if they get to the 10 years, there's a sunset clause, which basically says, okay, after 10 years, we won't do, the inspectors will never come again, you're on your own, you can do whatever you want with your nuclear program. I mean, talk about this. And he mentioned the fact in 1979, when the Islamic Republic of Iran took over and Khomeini took over, they had a new constitution, which jihad was the call for everyone to do. And that's what they've been doing ever since for the last 36 years. Does someone think they're going to stop right now? Evidently, some of the members of the Democratic Party and of Congress do, but it's just, I don't know. How do you explain something like this? It's beyond me, except we know there's a supernatural darkness and blindness going on.
Well, and that's exactly it. I mean, it's what Netanyahu alluded to, that old Persian aggression toward Israel that dates all the way back to Esther's day and all those things that took place. And that was a key element to the speech, I thought. And I don't know if you saw that video, Don, that was floating around today about the AIPAC speech of Susan Rice. The audience was clapping in all the wrong places. And she would say something that she deemed to be negative, and everybody would cheer. And then when she would say something that she thought was positive, it was dead silence. And the audience was letting her know that they were against everything that she was saying. And, you know, she had this kind of dumbfounded look. She had a Nancy Pelosi look. I told you I'd get one in, but
that's a good,
she had this kind of just, what are you guys doing kind of look, and it threw her off her cadence a little bit a couple of times, but it was just really interesting to see that type of thing develop. And, you know, looking at this polarization again that is happening, you know, it's not just here, it's also happening in Israel. And there were a lot of folks who did not want Netanyahu to come. And, you know, it just plays into that whole scenario that we're seeing happening all over the world. And that is, the facts don't matter, truth doesn't matter. It's just the politicking that matters. And they didn't want him to come because it might sever the relationship with the United States, regardless of the fact, or damage it at least, regardless of the fact that what Netanyahu came here and said was true. And he actualized the threat in words for us to understand better as American citizens. And, you know, we're not looking here, you know, from the position or perspective that he's looking at, and he brought it to us so in a way, and packaged it in a way that American people could understand the depth of the threat, the length of the threat, and the consistency of those who are making the threat. And it's just something that continues on and on and on and on. But, you know, he tried to tell us in a very clear way, it's coming to your house too. So be prepared. And yet, you know, the president, he wants to go and send the team over to negotiate with the Iranians, who, now get this, there's this kind of interesting. This guy spooked me a little bit, our president, the first time that he went and made a speech to Egypt. Because one thing we need to recognize, the Muslim men can marry Christian women because the children are the religion of the father. And therefore, the reverse isn't going to work, because the father, if he's a Christian, then the kids will be born Christians. Now remember, in this part of the world, many of the countries, when you are born, your birth certificate has your religion stamped on it based on, you know, whatever your parents are. So the first thing that our president did on the famed apology tour was go and speak to the Arab world and say, my father was a Muslim. And if the children carry the religion of the father, and you're a Muslim listening to that, then what are you going to come away with? Well, this guy's a Muslim. So now you add that to this packaging of this nuclear deal, whatever this agreement allegedly is with the Iranians, and I thought it's kind of curious that it has a time limit on it of 10 years. And do you know that Muslims are allowed to make a pact or a treaty for 10 years, but for no longer? So here we've got our president, again, initiating a deal within the guidelines of the Quran. And it's packaged exactly like the Quran. Muslims are not allowed to make a pact or a treaty with any people regarding any issue for more than 10 years. So, I don't know, it's just really getting kind of interesting to watch all these things surface and to see so many of them rise to the surface here in the last days. And it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, what's amazing too is, like, Prime Minister Netanyahu made it was so great to hear a speech from the nation's capital with a real leader. We haven't had a speech like that in a long time, have we? From really either party in a long, long time. A leader making a speech, basically comparing the Constitution of the United States, which talks about exporting freedom to the world, with the Constitution of 1979 of the Islamic Republic of Iran, which says export jihad in the world. And now today, strangling 4 capitals in the Middle East, there is the Iranians, with Damascus in Syria, Beirut in Lebanon, Sarna in Yemen, and Baghdad in Iraq, where they've got tremendous influence today. There was a story, I don't know if you got to see it, that we mentioned a little bit on the radio today, the city of Tikrit, not very far from Baghdad. That's where ISIS has held that city. Well, there's an army attacking it, and the army attacking it is the Iraqis, plus led by the Iranians. The Iranians are actually there now, getting that close and working together with Shiites in the country of Iraq to attack the Islamic State. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, in this case, the enemy of your enemy is still your enemy. They're not your friend. And, the Islamic State, ISIS, and he compared the difference. They've got, knives and guns and YouTube. That's their, weapons. Iran is working on getting a nuclear weapon. And they have been not shy about it by saying their desire is first to destroy the little Satan Israel, then the great Satan, the United States of America. This has been their consistent message for years. And then President Obama have repeated the lie, saying, well, that's against their religion. There's supposedly a fatwa that came out 8 years ago from this man Khamenei that said, no, it's against our religion to build a nuclear weapon to kill. And the whole thing's a myth. The story, that's not true. This never came about, but it's been, like the big lie of Hitler, propagated over and over and over again. And yet it almost sounds like our president, the administration is almost a mouthpiece, as it seems, for, the Iranian regime. Now, today, Zarif, the guy that's the negotiator, said, he gets on the TV, I think it was NBC, and he says, we're really close to a deal, but maybe not. It's like, I don't know, what do you do with all this?
And the administration takes that and runs with it. We're closing in.
Yep.
But maybe not.
Maybe not.
It's kind of scary. And, there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that don't make, the media, obviously. And, one of the issues, I think, are the heavy water plants in Iran that don't seem to ever get on the table. And a heavy water plant is basically a shortcut to enriched uranium. And it saves the Iranians the cost of buying more centrifuges and separating. And you guys all know how to make uranium. I don't need to tell you that.
Sure.
But separating the U-235 from the U-238 and then having a weapons grade level of uranium that you can then obviously make a weapon into. So, or make into a weapon rather. And these heavy water plants have that specific purpose, is to bypass a step. And yet, the administration and the Iranian leaders came out even today and said, we have never, ever had the aspirations to acquire a nuclear weapon. We don't want a nuclear weapon. We're not going to build a nuclear weapon. Then why do you have a heavy water plant? Why are you building others? It just doesn't make any sense. But that doesn't seem to make it on the mainstream media's radar. These things that are easily researched and understood, if you just take a little bit of time and, figure it out. I mean, come on, these people are supposed to be reporting the news, but it doesn't seem like that happens much anymore.
No, and there's so much going on that Prime Minister Netanyahu alluded to, such as just this last week, in a mock drill, there was an American, a destroyer out there in the Persian Gulf that was blown up by, the Iranian military, in a mock, attack on it. At the same time, they're supposed to be making some type of agreement where, they're the state that's a peaceful, loving, and peaceful state, and that they're exporting global terrorism. As he talked the APAC conference on Monday, they're in 5 different continents now, 5 continents, Iran and their minions, exporting worldwide terrorism, the number one, perpetrator of terrorism in the world. And yet in this agreement, there is nothing said about their exportation of terrorism, their possible military work on a bomb or a long-range missile or anything like that. That's totally off the table. All they're talking about, from what we know, is just this enrichment of uranium that's supposedly going to be kept at a level for peaceful purposes, because that's what they've been lying and telling us they're going to do these last 18 years as they've been working on it. But like Barry said, there's other ways to get there. And it almost seems, again, like our own leadership. Well, here's what it does seem like. They're gonna want an agreement, because what Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday, it's almost like, oh, you don't want us to have an agreement? Oh, we'll show you. We'll get it that much faster, and we'll do it. And we don't care what you want, what the American people want, or what Congress wants. President Obama has already said if Congress passes a bill that says they must have some type of input in this negotiation, he's going to veto it. In other words, it's not a Congress thing. This is going to be his thing. He's going to make the agreement with Iran, and it's supposedly going to be something that's going to be safe for Israel and the U.S. And Monday's speech, there was something, the APEC speech, another great one, Prime Minister Netanyahu made. He says, the United States, you here think about security. In Israel, we don't think about security. We think about survival, and that's the big difference between the two militarily.
Even this author, or this doctor that wrote the article for Al Jazeera, made the comments about, that the issue of legacy is trumping the issue of human existence in the mind of this president, and that he's more concerned about accomplishing something that's going to go down in the history books than he is about the survival of the neighboring nations, including the Saudis and others, who have long been our allies. And there's an article floating around today that basically this administration has traded in one Middle East partner for another, and they have shelved the Israelis and now partnered with the Iranians. And, with the track record, looking at even the human rights issues, and to say nothing of the rights of women, and looking at the practices of these groups and in these countries and the executions that take place, the honor killings, the killing, throwing gay people off a building, in order to execute them because it's worthy of the death sentence. I don't understand why this administration just doesn't see these things and bring these issues to light and make the rest of the world aware of exactly what they're dealing with. But again, it seems like the agenda trumps reality, fact, anything that is legitimate that ought to be a real concern. And the guy just seems to be more concerned about making his mark than actually having an impact or help the world in any way.
Was that a pun that purposeful, thinking we're going about Revelation 13 soon about the mark of Obama? Or was that just something you just, okay, you weren't thinking of that, okay.
Well, wait a minute, let me add up Obama Hussein. I don't know if it's 666 or not.
Yeah. Dr. Al-Faraj, I've got a little bit what he wrote there. I'm very glad of Netanyahu's firm stance. This is the Saudi doctor, of his firm stance and decision to speak against the nuclear agreement at the American Congress, despite the administration's anger and fury. I believe that Netanyahu's conduct will serve our interests, that's the Saudis now, and the people of the Gulf, much more than the foolish behavior of one of the worst American presidents, close quote. Then he went and say this: Obama is the godfather of the prefabricated revolutions in the Arab world, and he is the ally of political Islam, which is the carrying mother of all terrorist organizations, this man wrote, suggesting that any deal struck by this particular American president simply could not be trusted, close quote. That's amazing coming from a Saudi, but that came out the day of the speech. So, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of peripheral things going on. I think some of them that don't, again, make the radar. There was an interesting report that came out today about the oil levels here in the United States. Yes. And now here we've got all these major players kind of circling the battle theater, so to speak, that's described in Ezekiel 38 and 39. The coalition is in place. The nations are now interacting. And there's that cry that comes from Sheba and Dedan. What do you come to do? You've come to take booty and these other things that take place during that particular scenario. But one of the things I thought was curious today, and you probably don't know this because it didn't pop up on any mainstream media again, but the United States has more oil inventory than it's had in the last 80 years right now. Mm-hmm. We are importing 1 million barrels a day more than we're using, and the next thing that is going to happen is we're going to reach a maximum, and we're not going to be able to import any more oil because we can't store any more oil. And what that's going to cause, and the Saudis have already said that they're going to hold fast on their production levels. They're not going to decrease their production any. They're going to keep driving the price down because it affects the Iranians, because it affects their bottom line and impacts them directly, and it's their own way of imposing sanctions. Well, if we have this glut of oil and oil producers stop exporting because we stop importing, and also here in the United States we have no way to store more oil, yet we're still producing oil because that's one of our industries here in the country, what some are seeing is that in the foreseeable future we could see $20 a barrel oil, which drives the price down. And when you are Russian and it costs you $100 a barrel to get the oil out of the ground, selling oil at 20 bucks a barrel isn't going to work. So therefore you've got an aggressive monster that needs to be fed that's going to move in this particular region of the world where all the oil is, because 60% of Russia's income is from energy products. So they've got to be selling natural gas. They've got to be selling oil, and now here we are in a plus-positive situation with the oil supply in one of the world's second largest consumer of oil, China being the first, taking place and driving prices down. is not good for multiple economies around the world. So it's kind of an interesting scenario developing.
Yeah, we found out this week, too, it's not really good to be an enemy of Vladimir Putin, is it, at all? One of the things that Joel Rosenberg has said in the last week I thought was brilliant, I told him that, is making the distinction between radical Islam and apocalyptic Islam. And unfortunately, in the speech, Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about militant Islam. But see, you think of militant Islam, you think of Al-Qaeda, you think of Islamic State. There's a difference here. Islamic State and Iran have something in common. They believe in apocalyptic Islam. Now, they're two totally different, views. ISIS, or the Islamic State, are Sunni Muslims. Iran are Shia. They all have their own view of the end of the world, and it's both different. According to Sunni Islam and the way ISIS interprets it, they're going to establish a caliphate on the ground, and they're going to just expand from the Middle East to take over the world. So they're boots on the ground, standing from a piece of ground. The Shias, on the other hand, are going to use their military, or that's at least Iran thinks so, use the atomic or nuclear weapons to destroy the little Satan and the great Satan, and will bring, again, the final Mahdi to the world, and through that way. So they're going to take it, as it were, in a worldwide context and just bomb it instead of trying to take over some territory. Now, the leader of Iran, Khamenei, we've talked about this the last few years. He's told people he has met this 12th Imam. He's alive right now. Joel did a great, last couple of days, he'd had some type of research done, particularly in the Middle East, and taking polls about how many people think the Mahdi, the final deliverer, is still around, or is around or alive today. And it's amazing how in certain countries, almost everyone had over a 50% percentage believe this final deliverer is now alive in the world sometime today, right now today. And so they're expecting this to happen. Khamenei, in the last 8-10 years have been saying this, been telling students and this, well, this is the last generation, we're going to build a weapon, we're going to, destroy the enemy. And he's been saying that. He's not shy about it. Then remember before they've got this new guy in Iran, Rouhani, they had, after dinner jacket, the guy looked like running around, this crazy guy, talk about bombing everybody. That wasn't going over well with great PR. So now you got this smiley faced bearded guy who's actually persecuting more people and killing more dissidents in Iran, but pretending to the Western world, well, he's going to be moderate, so we can trust these guys. It just doesn't get much worse.
It's amazing. And just, I think here again, being part of that as a country and watching our country participate in this gets kind of disheartening, to see all this taking place. And yet we know that there is a projected end that the Bible has said, and we're spiraling toward that. And all these things play, whether it's a big part or a small part, they're clearly all pointing to that end. And Israel being the centerpiece, all these things, the world gathered against Jerusalem in unison, this taking place, and now seeing, come on, think about this. This country, as far as its footprint, is smaller than San Bernardino County. Yet the whole world was watching the speech of their prime minister just 2 days ago. And it captured the attention of the whole world. And everybody's got an opinion on Israel. Israel is a burdensome stone to the whole planet, and people are polarized considering, which side of the fence or whatever side of the fence they hang on. So, these are major, major events that are taking place and prophecies that are being fulfilled. And Don, I've had a lot of thoughts recently about this election coming up, and I think it could, really be an interesting turn of events that takes place here on the 17th. So, a lot of people were not real happy with, Netanyahu coming over. They didn't disagree with the content of the speech, but it was his presence and the fact that it angered Obama, that they were more concerned about than the fact that he was there, really presenting to their truest and longest friend their need for security and their need for protection. But there were some people who said, hey, this is too high risk. You're going to alienate our ally and damage our relationship. But this, I think there's huge potential for a dramatic change in Israel with this election on the 17th.
Yeah, in 13 days, now it'll be 12 since it's past, midnight there in Israel, there'll be an election where they'll, vote for a new parliament. And they're in a parliamentary system like England, like Australia, other countries where the party that gets the most seats, or the coalition put together that gets the most seats, elects the prime minister. And it's very close. The polls seem to be very, very close. The opposition party, and this, Barry, where I think this is where blindness is really over the people of Israel. The two leaders of the opposition party are, I mean, the leader, this guy, Isaac Herzog, looks like he's mentally ill. I'm sorry, but the guy does. He impresses me as someone who's not all there. And all he could do, is sit there and, carp against what, Prime Minister Netanyahu said. If he gets elected, the first thing he's going to do is run down to, Ramallah and talk with, Abbas and make some type of agreement. That has been tried before, and they've offered him everything. In fact, this is one of the things I think, and just as a segue into this, not only the election, but what we prayed for yesterday on the air with Joel praying about God stopping this agreement. Twice now in the recent past of Israel, 2000, 2001, there was an attempted agreement by Ehud Barak with Yasser Arafat. Arafat walked away from it, basically offered everything. 2007, the same thing happened. Ehud Olmert, when he was prime minister, offered Abbas basically everything, and he walked away from it. Never even a counteroffer for these people. Iran, let us hope and pray, because that no matter what the U.S. offers them, they're going to want more and more and more, where it becomes even unreasonable to our government and to our president. I think that's the best prayer we have of stemming this. Otherwise, Barry, I can't see it not an agreement coming about.
Well, I think one of the other interesting elements of this election is, if you've got a man who's willing to come and deliver a speech such as he did, and even with opposition brewing in his own country, and to say the things that he said and to lay things out the way he did, and even at the risk, and he took a couple of shots at Obama in that speech as well, as they were I think we could call them chocolate daggers, but they were daggers nonetheless.
Well couched.
He took some shots at him for sure, and that took some courage, and he shows himself to be a strong leader. Now, one of the things to remember is that in this scenario that's going to play out in the last days, that Israel is going to make a covenant with the Antichrist too. They're not going to be exempt from it. So that, I think, implies also that they're going to have a weakened leadership. Exactly. And this election could introduce that very thing and draw them into that whole arena. So, this is a big, big month, and it's just possible that, again, you've got a more liberal, possibly prime minister moving in, and one who's going to continue to make successions. And how many years did we hear about the land for peace, land for peace, land for peace? Well, they gave away land, but they got no peace. And the same thing, it'll be more the same down the road. But we do know, and here's one of the interesting things too, just looking at the whole scenario and what's going to come up in chapter 13, once we arrive there, we're going to find that the Antichrist is actually a Gentile. So you're going to have an Israeli leader who is willing to submit their government to a Gentile. Now, I'm thinking that's not Bibi.
No.
I'm thinking that he's not going to go that way. So a change in administration, it may not be this time, could be next time, but it seems inevitable just to allow this scenario to play out fully.
Yeah, and it's going to play out, too. It will play out. Remember, we've talked about this before in Ezekiel 38. There is no nation that can or will come to the aid of Israel. The United States of America is not a player. We can fill in the blank why. There's a number of different possibilities. We just don't know. But there's something else here, too. I'd like to get Barry's opinion on this. I talked to Chuck about this a few years ago. Unfortunately, it was sort of, like the last days of his life when it came to my mind, and, he wasn't the same Chuck as before to really catch it. But Barry will sure get this, and I'd like his impression. And forget it. Okay, no. Okay. Here's what we have, though, and this is interesting. And I'm thinking about, and just thinking out loud, I don't know the answer, none of us do, about how this is going to play, because the scenario in Ezekiel 38, 39, which I believe is going to take place fairly soon after the rapture of the church. I think the rapture comes first, then this scenario, because God's going to start opening some Israeli eyes. All right, with this particular scenario of Ezekiel 38, 39, this is a ground invasion. This is not some type of nuclear missile exchange one way or another, because one of the problems is we could develop this, and even John McCain was, emphasizing this. If there's an agreement made with Iran, you're going to have an arms race there in the Middle East. Saudis are already talking to the Chinese about doing this, and so this is, and Pakistan and other countries. So they're already working towards that, because they're not going to be left behind, because they know they're going to be next. But what we have in Ezekiel 38 is a boots on the ground battle. There's nothing, as far as I can tell, in the passage that indicates any type of, missiles or rockets or any type of flying things flying back and forth. And so that assumes, to me now, somehow either the nuclear program has been, well, I don't know. Well, what are the possibilities? What do you think?
Well, I think that's a good point on several fronts. One, because we see a lot of this type of activity during the tribulation period. I mean, there's other battles that are fought on horseback and, foot soldiers and things like that John isn't using figurative language to describe. I mean, he knows what a soldier looks like. He knows what a horseman is. He knows what a horse is. And there's battles fought like that in the midst of this tribulation period. And I agree with Don on this being the Ezekiel 38 and 39 battle. One, it's not the Battle of Armageddon.
No.
And yes, it is early in the tribulation period, and I do believe it is what, brings about the end of any type of power for Islam.
Exactly.
So, just looking at that particular scenario, looking at the region of the world where this battle is going to be fought in, one, we know that there are, major ramifications to a nuclear exchange. And that has to do with everything within that area. I mean, look at Chernobyl. Look what's happening with this earthquake that took place in Japan. So when you've got the oil reserves, the main oil reserves of the planet, it's a lot easier to go in boots on the ground than invade the area and leave everything intact. I mean, you don't want to blow down these refineries. Israel now has found 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas off the coast of Haifa. And this now competes with the natural gas exports of Russia. So, again, you've got that booty, coming into play. But, who knows how the scenario is going to actually develop, because there are a lot of weapons in the area. You've got even in the near area, you've got the Pakistanis and other areas or other countries, I should say, that are nuclear powers. So, why they don't engage in this type of weaponry, I think it's anybody's guess, but I think there's a pretty good case you could make because of what's in the land itself.
Yeah, and if they have, and there will be a government there, of course, as we know in Israel, that will make this agreement. And the Russians, of course, are have a military alignment, a military pact with Iran, and they need to, like you said, take what's there, because if you got some nuclear weapon that obliterates the country or does anything with the country, then the oil, natural gas isn't going to really be there for the taking, is it? I mean, it's going to be a long time before you could even get in there, and so it seems that. Even though Iran's rushing towards that, there is a time limit, a shelf life on when all this can end. Now, we're not date setting, please, saying that what can happen, but they're inexorably moving towards this bomb, and they're going to, eventually they plan on using it because they have this apocalyptic view of the world. They're going to bring in this final Mahdi. So it's getting curiouser and curiouser, isn't it, as we go one day closer?
Yeah, it is. And just watching all these players become more and more aggressive, think about this. You've got partnerships now with Israel and Egypt.
Yes.
I mean, there's been a very loose treaty that they've agreed to, but now there's not a treaty. I mean, they're partnering and fighting ISIS in the Sinai and other, Hamas and other groups in the Sinai. And now here you've got, there's an agreement made between Israel and Jordan to try and save the Dead Sea. That just took place 2-3 days ago as well in the same 72-hour window. And then on top of that, now you've got the Saudis and the Israelis have an agreement where the Israelis can use Saudi airspace to get to Iran if they'll take them out. So here you've got these strange bedfellows that the Bible predicted would be in partnership, thousands of years ago, and now here this whole thing is happening right in front of our eyes. Now, this may not sound very theological, but here it is. That's cool.
I read that somewhere in the Bible, I think, yeah. It is cool, because can you think, and just stand back again, we do this all the time, we'll be doing it tomorrow a bit on World News Briefing. Can you imagine all the specific things we're talking about? We're getting this from Scripture that have been predicted, that, we put the scenario up that the Bible predicts, and all these pieces of the puzzle coming together. The odds that this would happen by chance, can you imagine how incredibly impossible it would be? It assumes there's an Israel in the last days. It assumes they're in the world's headlines in the last days. It assumes every nation in the world's against them in the last days. It assumes they have something these other nations want in the last days. They assume there's no superpower that can or will intervene for them during that. I mean, you start going on and on and on and on. And after a while, you think, hey, something supernatural's going on here. This has been predicted ahead of time by someone that knows the outcome, and that's the good news as far as we're concerned. Look, we're in the hand of Christ. We're His kids, and we're here as long as He wants us here. Well, if He doesn't want us here, we don't want to be here 1 second longer, right? And so so we rest in that. But again, just the other night before the speech that Prime Minister Netanyahu made, just watching the response the night before, President Obama and Susan Rice to AIPAC, I just said, I was texting with Joe Rosenberg and Greg, I said, I'm sorry. I just don't see, and I know we can pray, I just don't see any hope for the leadership of the United States, or the only hope we have is some type of Iran overreaching themselves. Otherwise, there's going to be an agreement, and Lord help us if there is. But again, it's fascinating times to be in when we're in Revelation chapter 12, which the whole plan of the ages is opening up, and here we're living it right now about the next step, Revelation 13, the two beasts, the man of sin, the Gentile political leader, then the religious leader, probably a Jew, the second beast, the false prophet there. So I think our timing's been pretty good going through Revelation, Barry, getting it right now. Does that mean, well, anyway.
Well, just
Jesus.
watching all these things that are happening, I think, in our own country, I think most of us that are, got a couple of years under us would have never imagined that things would happen like this. But I think one of the key elements to that is to note how fast it's happened. And that's one of the introductory features of the book of Revelation. Once this whole thing starts, it'll start happen in quick succession once it begins. And now we're seeing, just like birth pangs, as Jesus talked about, we're seeing things increase, and they're getting more and more intense, and they're closer together, and things are happening on a daily basis. And Don and I have kind of laughed on his channel a few times about, several years ago when he and Pastor Chuck were doing the program, you'd have to do some fishing to find a whole hour's worth of material.
Big time.
Because things weren't happening like clockwork like they are now. And now here we've got, we could sit there for 4 or 5 hours and just scratch the surface of all the things that are taking place. But one of the things, a lot of the subtleties that are happening now is I think our country has been slowly becoming a nation. We heard this phrase used when we were over in Malawi. Someone spoke about the president of that country that turned them into a nation of beggars. And that's really what's happening here. We're becoming a nation that is dependent on the government. And this is setting the stage for, that man of sin who's going to come, and he's going to operate just within that system. In that system, hey, it's all about the government. It's all about the man. It's all about, the leaders that he surrounds himself with. And our country is priming the pump for him. And some of these moves that have been made, the levels of economic aid that people are getting in our country, trying to legitimize the aliens and all those things. And, I think we all have to recognize, I don't think there's anybody who loves Jesus that wants to see children die trying to cross the border or go without food. And that's not the issue. When you stand, fast for the immigration policies that our country has held, and there's bottlenecks in the system. But, for me, looking back on our own country's history, the issue is really about our country's history and the fact that people stood in line, people saved their money, people brought one family member over at a time to walk through the gates at Ellis Island just for the right to become an American and not come here and then start disparaging the country that has welcomed them and fed them and educated them and given them medical care and all the other just horrific things we've seen on these videos. There's nothing wrong to wanting rules concerning immigration in our country and wanting people to follow the same system that we followed all along. But again, here we are in this entitlement society. The government has to hand you everything. You have to be completely dependent upon the government. And this is, again, setting the stage for that guy to come along and say, hey, you want to buy or sell in this marketplace? Then you need a mark on your hand or your forehead in order to do so. And the stage is being set.
Yeah, and of course, with the exponential rise of technology, it can be a reality sooner rather than later, right? As we're seeing things happen at such a rate with respect to commerce that's going on right now without, cashless society, this and that. As soon as you don't need credit cards or a wallet. Like Dennis said a few months ago, if some of you might have seen the program on his channel, it's not things we'll be wearing, it'll be things in our body that'll be able to do types of transactions. And lest we forget, we also have a Temple Mount story. There was a ruling by the Israeli court, was it yesterday, the day before, that basically said Yehuda Glick and others could go up and pray freely on the Temple Mount. They went yesterday morning, that would be Wednesday morning there in Israel. It's Thursday now. Chaim Richmond, the people from the Temple Institute, with this new ruling. And the leaders there, I mean, the police on the Temple Mount said, no, there is no ruling. There is no court ruling. Well, there was. It was a legal ruling, but it's like, no, it doesn't exist, even though it does exist. And so that again adds to the fuel and the fire of those that want to see some type of sovereignty there in that place, that holy place for them where the first and second temple stood, not only freedom of worship, but eventually to build a third temple and all that's going on too. And particularly, and I like what you said, Barry, it's sort of frightening to think about, but it would be a surprise, but if this other party, not the Likud, this other party, Labor, they call the Zionist party, actually anti-Zionist, that got elected there in Israel, what that would do. Again, we don't know. It may be the fullness of time, it may not. But things are happening so quickly, I mean, nothing would shock us anymore. So, like we say, stay tuned, right?
Well, and that's why it's so interesting about the protests about Netanyahu coming here, is because it was concerned about the view of Israel in the international community, trumping their sovereignty, trumping their safety. It's how are we going to look in the eyes of the rest of the world, and especially, President Obama, So, these little details, those subtle, they're really magnificent, and just all the spokes are being put into the wheel. And to watch these things happen, and so quickly. I was talking with someone the other day and was just reminded of how quickly the world can change. And, we used to have adages like the wheels of progress grind slowly and things like that. But boy, I tell you, 9/11 told us the whole planet can change in just a matter of hours. We could get up tomorrow morning and this be a whole different world. Something go down in the Middle East, Israel attacks Iran. The United States, as though it's been denied, the Kuwaiti paper that reported that we threatened to shoot down, Israel's aircraft if they were flying over to take out the Iranian nuclear program. Just any of these things could just send the whole world in a tailspin, because the whole world now, because of the information age that we live in, is watching all this stuff go down simultaneously. Everybody is seeing things. It doesn't take anybody days, weeks, or months like it used to years ago to get information. You can watch it on your smartphone, your iPad, and that's one of the things I've always thought funny, Don, going to some of these third world countries, especially a country like Malawi or some of the townships in South Africa. You see these people living in third world conditions, but they have a cell phone. And they know exactly what's going on in the world. So pretty amazing to watch all this. It's a great time to be alive.
It's a great time. And one more thing, just want to say quickly, the thing that Barry mentioned, some of you might have heard this story, a Kuwaiti newspaper, within this last week said in 2014, last year, there was a plan that had sort of been hatched by Prime Minister Netanyahu to when they realized negotiations were going on, to send some bombers over and do some type of destruction to the nuclear program there. Anyway, supposedly the way the story goes, that someone in Israel who was a friend of John Kerry, of course, who once served in Vietnam, our Secretary of State, then told President Obama, and President Obama supposedly said if they do that, same thing Brzezinski said in 2008, if Israel does that, we'll shoot down the Israeli airplanes. Now I want you to think about this for a second. What Prime Minister Netanyahu said yesterday with the most power and passion and everything, it said Israel has to, we will stand alone, because never again, all right? Yeah. Now, can you imagine if this story was true, that they were actually threatened, but if their very existence is threatened? Let's just, again, we don't know. Let's say the scenario is the agreement goes through, and it's just the countdown to the demise of Israel. So, and Netanyahu, if he's reelected, thinking about sending, some planes over. But can you imagine thinking about this, if he would attempt to do that, if our government, our military attempted to shoot down Israeli planes going there? I mean, it's beyond unthinkable. But when he said that with such passion there, I'm wondering if maybe there's some truth to that story. In other words, you're threatening that, but we're going to do what we have to do, because never again, never again. So
Never again. And he was Netanyahu, though he didn't mean it the way that it's actually true.
No.
They are not alone.
No, they
And
aren't.
God said when they come back in the land, they will not be uprooted.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things that was on my mind today, too, just kind of in wrapping things up, was that, we need to remember that the tribulation period is the 70th week of Daniel. I think we're all quite aware of that. And it pertains to Daniel, his people, and his people's city, which is Jerusalem. But we also need to remember that part of the tribulation period, according to Zechariah 14 and other places, is God's retaliation on Israel's enemies. And that's really where we're at, too. It's not just, it's often packaged, the tribulation is often packaged as God's judgment on a Christ-rejecting world, but it's also God's judgment on the oppressors of Israel, which he has done throughout the course of history. One regime would oppress Israel, and God would use them as a disciplinary tool in his hand, and then he would punish that nation for what they did to his people. So, God is indeed allowing these things to develop in these last days, but part of the tribulation period is God dealing with the enemies of Israel. And obviously, them trying to thwart his plan, and the flood that comes after the woman and seeking to devour the child and her and the nation and all those things. God is going to intervene. So, I think we'll be watching that from the grandstands, but it's happening. It's all developing. So major time. We have to keep that peace in mind as well. God is going to defend the nation of Israel.
Yes.
That's what Zechariah tells us. In that day, God will fight as he fights. And he's going to fight on behalf of his people. And he's a big God, and he never loses. He's never even had a close fight.
No.
So with that said, would you all stand? Let's close in a word of prayer. Father, again, we're so thankful for telling us all these things in advance, Lord, so we can know and understand the shortness of time, though we clearly don't know the day or the hour and don't profess to. God, but we are aware enough through your word to see the signs of the season, that summer is near. And God, so we just pray that we would be wise and discerning, and God, we would speak the truth, and then we would do so in love to those who are around us, God. Those without you, those perishing. So Lord, give us that burden. Again, give us that passion for the lost souls in our lives, that they may hear truth and come to know you, the one who sets free. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I found the answers you need. Are you listening? I'll tell you the truth about God. My eyes haven't seen him, and these hands never touched him. I've never seen the wind, but I felt the breeze today.